Hello, beautiful beings. This video is for you if you're on your spiritual path, you're an energy healer, light worker, and you tend to be an anxious person. You tend to have a lot of that energy going on in your auric field, and you want to start dissipating it, or you already are starting to dissipate it, work through it, heal it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that because there's a lot of anxious energy in the world. And so we're going to talk about where it came from, what's going on the surface, and how we can start to whittle it down. You know, really at the root of it, having anxious energy is underlying having a lot of anxiety or extra energy built up and focused on in an area that we don't want. Some of us have a lot of energy that we get to use to create beautiful things in our lives. And when that beautiful energy isn't getting out in the world, or isn't being expressed, or isn't getting the love to be moved up out into the world, it sits in our body and it builds up and it slows things down, and it just, does what it can to release, resolve, but that's really nothing at all unless you're actively working on it, because it's probably something that you have picked up from your parents and their parents and their parents, with a lot of the energy through the ages, in harsher times, when our ancestors were running around being chased by animals or fighting each other. There was a lot of, survival was actually, something that you had to be on the lookout for. And so we've got generations of that anxiety built up in our body, creating anxiousness. And so it needs an unraveling. This is why when we really connect with our feminine energy, feminine power, she's the spiral. Sometimes you have to start with something on the outer edge, and then you move in and you get closer and tighter in and in and in until you pinpoint it and you're like, oh, I freed myself of something here, because I continually worked on it in layers. And so that's the anxious energy for sure. I know I felt it from my parents, and man, I'm really seeing now, as I've gone around the spiral a few times with healing this anxious energy, I'm really seeing how tightly woven I was. Like, had no room to let anything in. I don't even know how I got to where I was, or how I even got that far. As I've whittled this down and just gotten more relaxed and more chill and less allowing my energy to go into that anxious place, and I'm seeing that, like, there was so much. It was just like littering my body. No wonder no wonder I finally got to my breaking point and just, everything was lighting up, and I was just like, I gotta do something. And it's my saving grace. Because if we take this anxious energy, we have it as a child because we learned it, and then we take it into our adulthood, it's just going to amplify and build and amplify and build. And then as we go through life, that's going to diminish our quality of life. It's going to create dis-ease. It's going to create issues in our body. We're going to die sooner. And that's why there's so many cycle breakers right now. It's like, all right, we're clearing out that ancestral junk. We're gonna make space, because we are here to help raise the frequency on the planet. And the anxious energy needs to be transformed. And so it's a whittling down project. Whittling down. And the control. Anxious energy goes with control, and then it kind of goes with this rush energy too. Quick, move, do this before you die. Literally. And I'm able to kind of pull myself out of that more, or see when the pattern's coming up and I get to shift it. But there was a time when I would get triggered and that anxious energy would take over, and I would just hold on and control and force and control and force, and before I knew it, I was exploding out into this crazy anger because of the anxiousness around something. It wasn't being dealt with. And that's how it got dealt with. It built up so big that it just had to explode out in anger. So what has helped me do that? Like, whittle that down? Well, being aware of it. Being mindful of how my energy works and what's going on in my energy. Why, questioning why something makes me anxious. Like, I quite literally felt like I might have been allergic to the world. And which is funny because I had a grandma who had so many different allergies, and the energy signature I picked up from her is she's just allergic to life. Everything is just, can't bring any of that in, can't bring in that energy because it's just, you can't take it in. There's no room, there's no space for it. There's just too much going on in here. I'm gonna reject it all. So, meditation is very helpful for that. But catching yourself when you're in one of those anxious loops is probably the most helpful. We can meditate all day if we want to, but when we have to confront ourselves with a pattern and we can't overcome it, then, the meditation isn't as potent, because it's there to help us become aware of ourselves and to separate, that reactive triggering state to our higher selves. And so it's through recognizing and being aware when it is triggered and doing anything you can to bring it down a notch, to not allow yourself to invest in that pattern anymore, to find yourself, help yourself steer away from something else. Finding different modalities to use that energy to transform or alchemize it into something else, to use it for a creative project, or go exercise, or journal, talk to somebody, go meditate in that moment, put on some frequency music, reprogramming, sit still, sit down, stop when the pattern's hitting you, and sit still and sit with yourself. And just take account of what's going on in your body. You're like, oh, that's interesting. I feel the anxiousness showing up here, where. And then just feel it. Like, where are you feeling it? And what does it feel like? See how this starts taking you away from being in the triggered state. Because once you get on the deep end, that's when it's a lot harder to reel yourself in. That's when it's owned you. And even then, you still can do a few things to pull yourself out. But, once you get that hyped up, invested emotional energy into it, then it's like, and it's going to happen from time to time. But the point is that we whittle it down. We take the energy back and we free it up and we put it towards something more loving and kind. And so we keep doing that through the spiral, and before we know it, that pattern barely even exists within us. We've stripped it of all its power, and we're using it to create videos or create courses or coach or do something we love and share it with other people, or go get a job that lights us up, or something like that. Something beautifully creative that is from your soul. You broke that cycle, you claimed that power, that energy back, and you freed it, liberated it, and used it to your advantage, because that is your life force energy. We all have our own amount of life force energy, and certain patterns, energies, karmic patterns, subconscious patterns, conscious patterns, they all take from that life force. And when you get so bogged down from anxious energy and fear and anger, you're like dragging around a big old bag of bricks, and you probably don't have a lot of energy, and you probably aren't creating a lot or being creative or being flowing and, you know, moving with the flow of life. That's where I was. It's wild. So, the anxiousness, the control. You know, there's just so much anxiousness out in the world already. So when we can heal ourselves of it, there's a part of the world that we take our power back from, because the news, the media, they feed off that. They feed off that energy in there that's anxious. They want that energy to trigger back up and cause pain and suffering, to keep us in that loop. But we're not here to do that anymore. That's old news. That's why we're here, the light workers, energy healers, people who are destined to live from their soul. Spiritual people, witches, fairies, rainbow warriors. This is our time. We do the work. And so I really share this with you because I'm at a point where I've really whittled it down, and I feel like I'm about to bust through a new layer, and I've started just not giving a fuck. And I've heard about this idea, this thought of slowing down, not getting attached to outcomes and desires and whatnot. But I never really understood it until I got to the point where I could embody it and feel it and start utilizing it. And then I'm like, game changer. Because now my anxious energy isn't ruling me. I know when that energy comes up, I can focus on how I would rather be creating. Like, oh, I'm fearful that this could happen. Well, guess what? Now I'm going to start focusing on this happening. And so now I'm just going to go with the flow, and I'm going to clear that energy. I'm just going to keep noticing when the anxious energy comes up. I'm going to stop. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to feel it in my body, let it have space. And then once it passes, I'm moving on to something else. And then creative inspirations come from that. That is the energy that we take back and we get to express and have fun with. It's a very potent process and magical. So what I'm realizing now that I'm at the point where my anxiousness isn't controlling me, I'm much more easily inclined to just let things roll off me. Just slump off. Just pick it off, throw it, be done with it. Like my mind, when those intrusive thoughts pop up, they don't control me like they used to. And that's from taking that anxious energy back over and over and over. Now my creative energy is higher and more potent and more in the light than the anxiousness is. I'm starting to feel lighter. And so not caring about how things turn out as much is part of that. I have energy to just relax into it, to just not feel like I have to be doing and doing and doing. And that's part of that anxious control energy. We get in that anxious energy and we run around like chickens with our heads cut off, and we just keep busy. Because that's what fuels right for the energy. You burn it off. You burn that anxious energy off, and then you're like, ah. But then you like burnt yourself out too, because not only is anxious energy consuming your energy, but doing a million different things, running around crazily, is an energy suck too. So it's just like, no wonder there's a lot of like adrenal fatigues and like people just burning themselves out and being low on energy because they're just bogged down with all this anxious energy that would like to be released, but it's stuck in the patterns and the codes and the beliefs and the old energy. So I open this up to you. What do you do to help maneuver your anxious energy? You like to work out, you creative write, you stop and be present with your body. Like, what are the techniques that you do? How do you uplift your vibration when you feel like your body is triggered you into anxious energy and you're starting to feel controlling and constricted and you're just like, ah? How do you soothe that beast? I'd love to know. I know journaling is a very strong one because it's just like getting stuff out. Like, you just keep writing, getting it out, you know, continually purging that energy to free it up for something else. All right, give me those comments, share those beautiful experiences. I love to hear them. Until the next time, love and laugh.